make sense that she would go to Jody, for emotional support when she felt like her world was burning down. In the meantime, I felt like our marriage was getting stronger. It felt better. Like we didn't fight as much, and even though we were having less sex, it felt more connecting, and it was just. I thought, wow, this is great. Like, this is great, and I was happy to be the guy up on the stage. That started sometime in like late 2020 or the fall of 2020. There would be a conference, and Ruby would say, I thought we were just attending it, but then she'd say, hey, they wanted us to get up and tell our story, and I'm like, oh, okay, sure. And so I'd get up and just say, like, yeah, I was the guy who said, I think this is a bunch of, like, man-hating, women, but it really has made a difference in my marriage, and it really did. Like, I believed it. And so those conferences and stuff, everything continued like that until March of 2021, when after a conference, a Connections conference down in St. George, all the inner circle, all the people who were being trained as mental fitness coaches and stuff. So that was Ruby and a bunch of other people and their spouses. We went out to like a dinner afterwards, and that's where Jody really opened up to the women in a private conversation that she believed she was being tormented and haunted by shadow figures every night, and that was spooky, and I don't know exactly what happened, but the Hannahs do. All I know is at some point within a couple days of that, in that month of March, the Hannahs drove down from Mapleton and picked Jody up and brought her back to their home in Mapleton, and she lived for 6 weeks in that home in Mapleton. And this is where, like, I don't know what happened, but I do know that there's two different sides of stories. They tried to introduce her to a new cult lady that the Hannahs were getting into, so they wanted to merge their cults into one, apparently. And
they referred to it as a cult at the time?
Oh no. No one in a cult says, I'm in a cult.
Right. I was wondering. But from your perspective, it looks like two cult leaders merging together.
From where I stand now, absolutely. Yeah. According to Jody, she was held against her will for 6 weeks and was kidnapped, and she escaped and got out. According to the Hannahs, after 6 weeks of Jody stabbing herself with forks and knives, cutting herself, and wanting to commit suicide and trying to seduce the husband of the family, they kicked her out. I don't know what's the truth. Maybe a little bit of both, I don't know. But the point is, somewhere around mid-April, Jody was back in her home in Ivins, and she was a hot mess. And she reached out to Ruby for help. And Ruby was always jealous of the Hannahs, that they had a better relationship with Jody than she did. Ruby, and this is goes back to her childhood. She wanted to be the best friend. She wanted to be the most liked. She wanted to be the one that everybody knew. And so it hurt her that she felt like she was being excluded from what was going on at the Hannah's house. And then she'd say, why so many secrets? And the Hannahs would say, it's not secret, it's sacred. And when the time's right, you can know too, So we went down to Jody's house in May of 2021. That was the first time I'd ever been there. my mind, as I'm sure you have walked in there and gone, how does a therapist live like this? Like, didn't make sense to me. But we were there, and she opened up and talked about, her struggles and what was going on. And I gotta say, like, I'm a smart guy. I'm an engineer. I've designed and helped build some really big stuff. I've been a college professor. I can't explain some of the stuff that happened while we were there. Like crashes in the basement while we were talking upstairs, and plates like in the kitchen just flying off by themselves, like full speed, smashing on the wall and falling to the floor like by themselves. I can't explain it, but I saw it with my own eyes, and I don't have any way to explain it other than there's some crazy shit going on. Ruby was convinced that we could intervene and help Jody. I didn't want a thing to do with it. I tried to get her bishop involved and say, hey, go to the priesthood and the church and all that stuff. Just go to your support network. But Ruby continued to be like, no, we can help. Like, she doesn't want could you imagine what happened to her reputation if this got out and stuff? Let's help her. So we went down a couple more times between May and August, but it reached the point where in August, her bishop at the time, a guy who's down there in Kayenta named Scott Galbraith. He's not our bishop anymore, but I mean, he was going over there every night, and he'd be there for 4 hours, and he'd be like, I'm fighting evil spirits, I'm casting demons out, I'm crazy stuff going on, and finally he got to the point where he's like, I can't do this anymore. There needs to be some sort of resolution. It was at that point that they said, why don't you take her up to your house? And I was like, oh, hell no. I don't want this in my house. But I was beaten over the head with it. That's really insensitive. She's done so much to help our family, and you're being selfish, and she has needs, and come on, it won't be for long. And so I relented, and I was like, okay, actually, this could kind of be fun. Let's just make it fun, and we'll, she needs a vacation, so we'll just go take drives up the canyon and stuff like that. And it turned into just a crazy house. The moment she showed up in my house, just the weirdest crap started happening. Lights turning on and off, sounds of people walking in walls, and sounds like footprints going up walls and across the ceiling, and stuff floating around, and it was weird, and I hated it. And I became the resident exorcist. That was the title I came up with myself. I thought it was kind of funny, but it was my job to go and give her blessings whenever she started to go into a trance and go into possession, and which started to be a lot. And Ruby would go up and check on her. It started every 4 hours at night, and then it moved every 2 hours at night, then it moved every hour at night, and then at some point Ruby said, you know what, I'm just going to start sleeping in there, and if I need you, I'll come down and get you. I'm like, that's kind of weird, but okay. And that was that. They started sleeping in the same bed, and then she started having trances and stuff. I would say probably September where she believed that she was going to heaven and seeing God and Jesus and talking with them. And she would get together with Pam Botcher. Ruby, Pam, and Jody would get together and do these interventions. That's what they called them. And so they'd just go up and lock themselves in a room for 4 or 5 hours, and then they'd come out and they'd all just be on cloud nine, and Ruby would share with me like she had this amazing vision, and I wrote it and recorded it all down, and we have a work to do from God, and you're part of it, and the bishop's part of it, and we're all part of bringing all this stuff to the world. And so it was, and it continued like that until I wanted to move on with life. And I would call it dragging my heels, so that was around October. And Jody flipped out because during one intervention, Chad was in the backyard with a bunch of friends, and it was my job to keep all the kids contained in the basement watching movies or playing video games. And I took the dog on a walk, and I thought they were done, but they weren't done. And Chad had all his high school friends over in the backyard. Jody flipped out. She was ready to come back to Ivan's on her own that night, and Ruby and Pam talked her into staying. But that was the first night where Ruby said, I want a separation from you. And it was an in-home separation. And so it was, it was hard. Basically, there were all these rules now placed on me. Like, I could leave when I wanted, but I couldn't come back until Ruby gave me permission. I couldn't come into the kitchen to eat until Ruby gave me permission. And the upstairs where Jody roamed was completely off limits. I couldn't go upstairs anymore in my own house. And there would be, Ruby would dictate all of the terms of how our interactions would be, when we would talk, and that was hard. And it was during that time that I really became, I would say, dependent upon Ruby. Like, if she said a kind word to me, like, my whole day was made, right? And so that separation continued all the way up until the holidays, maybe the last week of December, first week of January, and then Ruby ended that separation. Jody went home the second week of January. But by that time, like, Ruby, Pam, and Jody were completely determined to do this work that they felt God had for them. And I thought it was crazy. Like, I thought it was just batshit crazy. Like, Ruby, you have a reputation, you have a multi-million-dollar business, you have a brand, and you are just giving it away. She wanted to legally, like, work with Jody's attorney to basically give Jody 8 passengers and become an employee of Connections. So basically the contract was Ruby gives Jody everything, and Ruby gets nothing in return. Our manager, our YouTube manager at the time, was like, red flags. Like, I don't know how to tell you. She is scamming you. Ruby fired him. And I was like, I believe our manager. I think he's right. And Ruby started threatening me with another separation. And just like, this isn't about money. This is about doing God's work. So we continued in that dynamic for the next 6 or 7 months until she went on a trip with Jody and Pam down to Arizona. And I think they, like, when I read her journal, she went into